Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Kombucha Kamp live stream. It is I, Hannah Ruhama, Kombucha Mamma, mother to millions of microbes, some of which might be inside of you, and for that I am eternally grateful. You might not even know that you have our microbes inside of you because we are also the culture supplier for many commercial brands. So it could be you're drinking your favorite booch, and you're also enjoying an heirloom Kombucha Kamp culture in that kombucha. Isn't that pretty cool? Well, our guest was not able to join us today, so we'll be rescheduling that, but I I look all adorable, so I wanted to show up and offer any answers to questions you might have. And I'll probably just talk about fermentation in general because it's one of my favorite topics. And I truly know that and trust that, and I'm aware that it is a cornerstone. It is a foundation to a healthy, happy human being. Now, why is that? It's a cornerstone because it's our bacteriological heritage. What this means is that we were born with bacteria. We received our first inoculation of bacteria from our mothers, of course, as we're in the womb. There's all kinds of nutrients and information being passed through the umbilical cord, through the placenta to the developing fetus. And then when we come through that birth canal, that initial inoculation of microbes is essential for us to be able to digest and process breast milk. So breast milk, of course, is where we're receiving some of our very first bacteria as well from our mother, our immune system, nutrients, of course. All of this is passed from mother to child. Now, part of what's happened in the modern world is that the mother may not have as robust of a bacteriological microbiome as her ancestors may have. And that's due to a wide variety of factors. It could be from antibiotic use. It could be from having their own issues with gut dysbiosis and whatnot. We know that that's one of the issues when it comes to fertility is if we don't have a properly functioning microbiome, that can throw our hormones out of whack. It can throw our systems out of whack. And when they're not online, when they're not in whack, does anyone say that? When my systems are whack instead of out of whack, then they're functioning properly. And so fermented foods are so vital to this process because it's where we get a lot of our microbes. We get them from the soil. So we get them from putting our hands in the dirt, from being in nature. We get them from petting animals. We get them from other humans. So hugging each other, kissing, sharing each other's food or cup. This is a very important way. And in fact, there are many cultures that have a tradition of sharing food. So I'm thinking specifically of yerba mate and how they share the mati, which is the name for the gourd. They put the yerba in there. You have the lavador, the person who's adding the water, and they offer this up to a small circle of friends who all share the same bombilla, which is the straw. So that little stainless steel straw is preventing the yerba mate leaves from getting into your mouth. And then when it comes back around, they add more water and it goes back through everyone again. Now, this is a very communal way to share our microbes, to share trace amounts of bacterial information that then our immune systems can process and digest, because your immune system starts right here in your mouth. And so our oral microbiome is really important as well. And all of these biomes, our skin biome, our oral biome, our gut biome, they all have their unique characteristics. I mean, think of us like a planet Earth. There's rainforest, there's desert, there's oceans, and there's different types of life that live in these different places because they serve different functions. And yet everything is all very intrinsically connected. Like the Matryoshka dolls, we are a literal manifestation of the world in which we live in. And so microbes are really important. Bacteria is really important. And there's so many ways, unfortunately, that in our modern society, we eliminate them or we destroy them. So for example, when we preserve food, when we have BHT and different preservatives added to our food, and we consume that food, right? That preservative is intended to create a longer shelf life so that things can be distributed from a farther away distribution point or manufacturing point. And when it comes to you, it isn't moldy. Well, the problem with food not going moldy or having an extended shelf life is that those same preservatives that protect the food also kill the microbes in your gut. So when you eat those processed preserved foods, you're also unknowingly, because we're probably not aware, that we're also then creating issues inside of our own bodies. And so again, there are numerous ways in which our microbiome is under assault. And this is why it's so crucial that we cultivate it mindfully on a regular basis. And what do I mean by that? I just shared hugging, kissing, getting your hands into their soil-based microbes. Where do you think they come from? The soil. And instead of having to pay, money every month to buy expensive probiotics that maybe have 1 strain or 2 strain or 5 strains, when you get them from nature, they're so incredibly diverse. They have numerous strains, 20, 30 strains in trace amounts. We don't even understand fully what they do per se, because we've not been able to tease out, oh, well, this strain and that strain. In fact, they all work together like a universe. So you have this universe inside of you. And it's so easy to cultivate because they're soil-based organisms. Really, all we need is an environment that's going to allow the microbes to ferment that substrate. So let's use an example, cabbage, sauerkraut. It's going to have the microbes from the dirt with it. We chop it up, make a surface area so that the microbes can have a lot of room to eat. Then we put that into an environment. We soak it in brine. And it could be, and these are some of the most ancient foods that humans have ever had. These are the most ancient preservation techniques. And the archaeological evidence suggests that this came about because humans would store wilted vegetables in earthenware pots in seawater. And so seawater has a certain percentage of salinity to it. And that's what our brine is. And what the brine does. So here's the reality. Let's just share this real quick. Pathogens are weak. By their very nature, they are weak. And the reason for that is, well, not the reason for that, but we know this because if they weren't weak, we'd all already be dead, right? The pathogens would be so strong, none of us would persist. Well, that wouldn't benefit mankind or humanity. So pathogens do exist, of course, and really, I think pathogens tend to be opportunistic. And what I mean by that is these are microbes who are given an opportunity to flourish in an environment that's beneficial for them, but that can create negative outcomes for other people. It doesn't mean that that microbe is inherently bad or evil, because what we've uncovered, for example, from the Hazda studies, if I'm saying that right, I don't know where the Z goes. Those are the tribe of natives in Africa that has been very well studied by the American Gut Project and several other biome projects. And what they found is that they contain many what we would consider pathogenic strains of organisms living inside of their bodies, and yet they do not exhibit symptoms of pathogenicity. So what that tells us is, first of all, we need diversity, but we also need to have the right amounts of the right microbes holding everything in place. And then these other microbes, maybe they're there to consume other types of microbes and to create the cycle of, right, we don't just infinitely grow, we also have to die, right? Cells die, they need to be removed from the body. That happens through autophagy, it happens through many different mechanisms, and perhaps that's part of the role of these opportunistic pathogens, is when we have that robust, diverse environment, they're able to do their job without creating the negative impacts on the humans. So all of this is to say is that we really need these microbes in our body. And so when we create that environment with the salt that will kill these pathogens, it doesn't allow them to grow in that salinity, and it allows these other microbes to then convert the substrate, in this case cabbage, because we're talking about sauerkraut, into lactic acid. And those acids lower the pH, making the food incredibly safe. Those acids are really important for human beings because they serve a wide range of benefits inside of our bodies. And they also prevent those pathogens from having an opportunity to proliferate in that environment. And that's why fermented foods are so safe for humans to enjoy, not just to enjoy, but to make at home. We have been making fermented foods since the dawn of time, since we've been able to store food. Some of our earliest fermented foods would be fermented dairy. Human beings have been enjoying dairy for tens of thousands of years. They found evidence of dairies in Turkey and places like this, where humans would cultivate the milk from other animals. And what's so beautiful about raw milk, and why it's one of the most nutritious foods we can consume, is it contains the microbes that help you to digest it. It literally contains lactose consuming microbes, such that it converts those proteins into something that's more digestible to human beings. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you like, if you want to know more. So the other thing that happens with milk, obviously we buy our milk at the store, it's refrigerated, we have to keep it refrigerated or we know it'll spoil, and that's because it's pasteurized. And what pasteurization does is it eliminates all microbial life, essentially rendering it dead and allergenic, because there's nothing in there to help consume the lactose. And this is why we now have these lactose-free milks that have been put through very fine sieves. But again, we're not getting that full nutritional promise when we're consuming a product that's been denatured, or such as pasteurized. That means we've killed the microbes and not allowed them their opportunity to proliferate. But those microbes will turn that milk into cheese, into sour cream. If you churn it, it'll turn into butter and give you buttermilk as well. And so these are some of those most foundational foods. And in fact, there's so many fermented foods, you may not even realize they're fermented because they've just been around for so long. And so all of these different fermented foods have different colonies of microbes that serve a beneficial effect. And it's not just the microbes themselves, it's the organic acids they create, it's the enhancement of the nutritional value, because essentially what they're doing is digestion outside of our bodies. And so instead of us having to, chew the lettuce, which again, raw cabbage is still good for you. I'm not saying don't have it, but we derive a higher nutritional value when we ferment it because of that pre-digestive process. And so then it's easier on the body to absorb those nutrients. It's easier for the microbes in your body to absorb those nutrients, because remember, what are we feeding? I get it. It feels like we're feeding this giant human being, but really we're feeding microscopic microbes inside of our body. They're so tiny. And this is why I say microbes are magic, because they're exerting positive effects, but we can't see or discern their activity other than I feel good, or I have more energy, or my digestive system is working, right? So we receive the benefits, but we don't actually see the mechanism by which it's happening. And that's why they're magic, from my perspective. Because a really good magician, you can't see how they're able to do their trick, and yet it's like magic. I had the distinct pleasure of seeing David Blaine in Vegas a couple of years ago, and wow, it's just tremendous what a really skilled magician is able to pull off. So here we have a great question. I understood we need prebiotics for probiotics to keep our gut healthy. Yes. So let me just break that down, and then let's talk about the skin. So prebiotics, right? We need all the biotics: prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, symbiotics. They all work together. They're all biotic because we're actually biological beings. Medicine would have you think we're chemical creatures, that, oh, well, if you put this chemical here, then this reaction happens and that's it. That's absolutely not true. We operate on biology, which is far more intricate, interesting. I'm not saying chemistry isn't part of that, but we're not just, add this, add that, boom. There's a lot more going on below the surface. And so as biological beings, those microbes, they need food to eat too. And that's why something like a sauerkraut is really great, because the fiber is not digestible by humans. However, we need fiber because it's what the microbes feed on. And so prebiotics are also going to be things like inulin, which you could get from chicory root. We have resistant starch, which is something we get when we boil potatoes or rice, refrigerate it, and then we eat it, because that cooling down process shifts the starch molecules within those foodstuffs and turns them into something that then is easier to digest by the microbes. We also have, fiber in so many forms, from our whole grains, from vegetables and things like this. And this is why, rather than juicing, if we can put something in a blender and have the skin and have the seeds, all of these things work together to support the prebiotics. So skin microbes, of course, are impacted by your gut microbes. That's the very first place, right? Everything starts here. Your skin is reflecting what is happening inside of your body. And that's why when you can even look at, I love to look this stuff up. There's so much more information that we don't know or aren't taught. And thank gosh we live in a world when we can see everything on a TikTok video or an Instagram live or wherever we might grab information. But you can go and map out. So let's say, like, I have a small zit here from, being on my menses. But I could go and look up like the map of where specific pimples or lesions will manifest and which organs they're tied to, because you see everything is connected. And you know more about your body than anyone else. Why? Because you live in it. And it's closing that feedback loop so that you feel more connected to it. So yes, there are things we can apply topically to the skin that are going to support the skin microbiome. Some things like this, and it really depends on what you're trying to work with here, but castor oil, there's a bunch of different types of oils. You might think, oh, well, if I put oil on my skin, it's going to make it oily. Actually, what it's doing is helping to support that skin barrier so that it's not allowing other things to get in through your pores. Another thing, you definitely want to eliminate any kind of chemicals that you're putting on your skin that can have a deleterious effect. A lot of deodorants, a lot of fragrances and sprays and beauty products and different things, they're so loaded with chemicals that have a net negative impact on your body, that switching those out for ones that have fewer ingredients, or that you make yourself at home, or that you make with things like kombucha. You can make a kombucha hair rinse. And what's so great about a kombucha hair rinse is that it's not going to strip your hair like something that's a higher octane would, right? So it's got a gentle acid. You can also use kombucha on your skin. It makes a fantastic toner. I'm going to talk to you about why, but you can use it for toner, for hair rinse, for a foot soak. You put it in your bath. I put milk kefir in my bath. You could use milk kefir in a face scrub, in a mask. You use clays, they're binders. They help to pull toxins out of your body. So whether you take clay internally through bentonite clay, or there's other binders you can take, humic and fulvic minerals and things like this, they're going to bind to whatever toxins are in there, and they're going to drop them out of your body. Of course, we need to keep the hydration flowing to help eliminate all these things. But when we use kombucha for these things, it's a very mild acid, but that acid is strong enough that it's going to cause the bonds of the dead skin cells to break. So it has a gentle exfoliation action to it. Those acids also help to soften the skin. There's also hyaluronic acid in kombucha, which we know is really great for skin. In fact, we can buy lots of things that have hyaluronic acid in them. It also has the precursors to glucosamine, so for joint health, for hair, skin, and nails. All of these things are going to be positively impacted when we're consuming fermented foods and using them on our bodies. Again, we're bacteria powered. We're what I like to call bacterio sapiens, because I feel like that more accurately describes our relationship of humans to the bacterial world. And when we can embrace that, that's really wonderful. Mud baths. Right? Like, you go to a spa and you pay a lot of money to have mud slathered all over you. You go to the Dead Sea and you sit in that water, you put that mud on you. Like, the reality is humus, dirt. Like, we need dirt. We're going to break down into dirt when we die and go back into the soil and become nutrients, assuming we haven't pumped ourselves full of formaldehyde or burned ourselves, right? So that is the cycle of life. The cycle of life is we contain the microbes that support life and function, but they're picking up on the chemistry we're creating within our bodies based on our inputs. And when that chemistry changes, they're going to think, oh, this is a signal this body is dying and I need to digest it. I need to break it down. And that you could be sending your body the wrong signals by consuming foods that don't support a healthy pH within your body or a healthy lifestyle. So there's so many ways, and it's so easy to quickly add fermented foods into your lifestyle that we should be having them daily ferments. I'm a huge fan of mixing and matching. Yogurt, you can put all different kinds of things together. You can make your favorite condiments and just elevate them with a touch of fermented. You can get really crafty if you're that experimental type and make it in your home, but you can also buy, this is what I love about right now, we can also buy a lot of really high quality fermented foods and drinks and don't have to make them ourselves. Now they're going to cost a little more, and that's as it should be. So you should always be suspicious of a ferment that's a little too inexpensive. You want to read that label very clearly and make sure you're not getting something from concentrate, which again, that's still better than a soda. And you know, soda got really jealous of kombucha and saw how well it was doing. They wanted to create a cheaper alternative, and they put inulin and different things into soda, but it's been well known since the 90s that in that level of acidity, those things break down. Again, those acids are digesting them and turning them just into pure sugar bombs. And so while you thought your soda was, you know, was functional or better for you, unfortunately, it just is a big sugar bomb. And that's the proposition. That's the value proposition of fermented. Is fermented is going to digest those sugars. It's going to convert them into those monosaccharide components, which have a lower glycemic impact on the body. There was a human trial out of Georgetown showing that folks with type 2 diabetes had lower fasting glucose rates when they consumed kombucha on a regular basis. There's an amazing study out of Stanford, human trial following people, which is better, high fiber diet or fermented foods. What they found is that people who consumed the fermented foods had a reduction in inflammation markers. And when they stopped eating the fermented foods, those inflammation markers return. And so a lot of our fermented foods, it's not like, oh, I eat this and now they're living inside me and I don't have to eat it anymore. They're very transient. And this is why we consume them on a regular basis. So it's not like, oh, I had yogurt this week. We need to have them every single day in different ones too, right? If we're only having one type of ferment, we don't want to monoculture our body. And this is the same issue with our probiotic pills. If we're only taking an acidophilus supplement, well, you need more than acidophilus in your body. And so you can end up having negative impacts by over consuming one type of probiotic. And this is why the diversity is so important. And you don't even necessarily know what your specific body needs until you start digging in deeper. And so some of the ways you can do that is working with a functional diagnostician. So there's a lot of folks, or a nutritional therapist. There's a lot of folks who have very specialized studies that aren't included in medical school. It's really a shame. You know, if our healthcare system started with food as a base, imagine how much healthier our population would be, how much less metabolic disease there would be, how much less the epidemic of mental health that we're experiencing right now. All of this can be tied back to wanting to only use chemistry and then finding out, in fact, it isn't an imbalance of chemistry in the brain. It's literally a lack of healthy microbes creating the serotonin and dopamine that you need in your gut. It all comes back to the gut. And this is why I say our gut is our first brain, because you don't fix this and then your gut gets healthy. Your gut has to get healthy and then you feel great, because we're bacteria-powered bacteriosapiens. You don't have to blah, 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 blah like me, but I just like to because it feels really good. It feels really good. And here's the other way in which we're like bacteria. Let me just share, right? So back, this is the root word of bacteria. It means rod-shaped. Well, what are we? We are kind of rod-shaped. And in fact, everything's tubes. We're totally tubular. You've got a long tube that goes from here to the end. We're encased in a tube. We have tubular extensions. Now, the other thing about bacteria is they're pleomorphic, meaning they change based on their environment. And this is what I mean about opportunistic pathogens. So you might have something in your body that has a certain impact, but when the environment changes, they morph, they shift how they function in your body. Really fluid. And we as human beings, when we're going from one environment, let's say we're with families and friends, we act a certain way. We go into another environment. We're at work. Now we have to behave a different way. We're pleomorphic in that we also adjust who we are based on our environment. Now talk about genetic transfer. So the really cool thing about bacteria is when they rupture, when they die, and this is part of why pasteurized ferments are still good for you. You still want to have them. Of course, I'm always going to emphasize wanting to have raw or living, but it doesn't mean that pasteurized have no value to them. In fact, they do, because when those bacteria die, other microbes can come in and utilize their genetic material. And so genetic transfer can happen. This is also what happens with superbugs, because when you're using sides, bactericide or whatever, when you're putting when you're using an antibiotic and you're trying to, nuclear bomb everything in your body willy-nilly, even the targeted ones. What happens is those, bad guys figure out how to hide out and wait it out. And this is why you're supposed to take them for such a long time, is because while you might get a first initial round of the bad guys killed, they want to live too. And so they've evolved to like, well, let's just wait it out and let's just wait it out. And then those genes are the ones that get selected for. The ones who die easily because they don't know to wait it out, they're eliminated. So you're going to have fewer of those. And this is how superbugs are created. But what we know is like controls like. Microbes control microbes. Yeast control yeast. And so when we're putting those good guys back into our bodies, they're able to take care of those things. But right, so genetic transfer. Memes. Memes are a form of human genetic transfer. Hear me out on this, right? What is a meme? A meme is a joke. You understand the base of the joke, then you put your specific spin on it. You're literally taking the DNA of the joke, the image, the video clip, the sound clip, whatever it is, and then you're putting your personal spin on it. You're literally transferring that DNA into a new joke and then putting a different envelope around it, right? So we act like bacteria. We exhibit bacterial behaviors. And this is why I think Bacteria sapiens is an appropriate name for human beings. I still like human being, but I think Bacteria sapien just allows us to start to really come into right relationship with microbes. So instead of fearing them, instead of being afraid of them, how do we invite the ones in our bodies that are going to make us strong? And there are bacterial force field. Literally, they can take a DNA sample of the microbes that live around you. Think about pigpen, right? Except instead of it being dirt, it's microbes. We all carry this cloud with us. Now, part of me thinks perhaps microbes are our intuition. Microbes are that gut instinct. Microbes are a way that we quorum sense. So let's say you have your robust bacteria force field. You go out into the world and maybe you meet someone and you're like, oh my gosh, we're so connected. There's all these, like small world, like we're just meant to be friends or we're meant to know each other, right? We all love when those encounters happen. And maybe they last a season, maybe they last a day. But you get this like, and sometimes you meet someone and it's like off or weird, but you can't totally put your finger on what it is. And maybe later you'll go back and think like, oh, well, this was right. Like you'll try to piece it together. But perhaps the reality is your microbe sensed that there was something off in their bacterial force field, that maybe they had malintent, or maybe they're just someone who's out of balance and doesn't have that same level of energy, frequency, vibration that you have, be that from your microbes and whatnot. And so this is a way in which trusting your gut, trust your gut, because it's your first brain, is so important. Now here's let me just give a caveat to that, because sometimes we think, oh, well, but I crave sweets. And maybe you have candida overgrowth, which can happen because of antibiotic overuse and different things. So we end up with this opportunistic pathogen. We all have candida in our body, but when it overgrows, it demands sugar. It demands processed carbohydrates, and it doesn't like fiber, and it doesn't like kombucha because those things are going to come in and kill it and put it back in its place. And so you have this like, oh, my gut says I want, cereal, and my gut says I only want to eat white bread, and my gut says I only want, but it's not, because then on the other end of that spectrum, you eat those foods, now you're bloated, now you've got eczema, now you don't feel good. We got to close that feedback loop and observe what is making me feel this way. If I put this in my body and I feel like crap later, okay, I need to start to make that connection. And this is where then putting knowledge into your mind is important, but the wisdom comes from the lived experience. And so it's good to know this and to understand, hey, if I'm a picky eater, I need to start putting sauerkraut in my mouth and then spitting it out. Because even if you don't chew the sauerkraut, swallow the sauerkraut, same with kombucha, put it in your mouth, hold it for 10 to 30 seconds and then spit it out. This is how you get picky eaters to start to be able to tolerate ferments, because the reality is we crave fermented foods. We crave sour. We crave bitter. These are the flavors of health and digestion. Now, of course, over craving them have their own balance issues. So it's not about only eating sour and bitter, but we need those flavors in order to properly digest, to signal to the body, right? We need the salivary glands to start working immediately. This is sending signals to the digestive system. Food is coming in. Bitter does this. Sour does this. And this is how we start processing and digesting all of these things. And emotions need to be digested. Yeah, that's right. We don't just digest food, we digest experiences. And if we don't, and we let them fester in the body, just like food that can't be utilized, it can ferment in the gut, it can get sludgy, it can prevent us from being able um, uh, to be able to absorb nutrients, right? You could be eating the healthiest foods in the world, but if your gut is out of balance, it can't absorb those nutrients because there's literally biofilms blocking from being able to consume those things. And that's why we need to have all of these things. But we do that with emotions too. We have something that happens to us and we don't want to think about it. And I'm not someone who's like, oh, ruminate, wallow. It's okay to have emotions and to feel them. Be sad when you're sad. Be angry when you're angry, and things like this. So, and digest and release. Digest and release. Digest and release. Digest and release. Notice the patterns in your life. Where are you just doing things as a knee-jerk reaction? If you're doing, and I still do, I do things like my knee-jerk response or my like. This is a stupid example, but like my husband comes to the office and I go, hey, but by making this voice, my dogs get all like, blah, blah, blah. But it's just a knee-jerk reaction. He comes and I make this sound. And so now I'm learning, okay, how do I have a different type of greeting or a way that doesn't then activate the dogs into like, oh, she's speaking in this high tone and I'm supposed to do something, right? So that's a very slight example, but there's lots of different, like getting into the same types of relationships again and again and again because they're familiar, even if they're traumatic. And instead of wallowing in our trauma, how do we then say, hey, look, everybody gets dealt cards. Some of those cards are good and some of those cards are bad. And it doesn't matter what cards you get, we all have to, that's the whole point of life. The point of life is we have cards and we play them. We have cards and we deal with them. We have situations, negative and positive. And, we might have wonderful opportunities, but we're too afraid to fully take advantage. And then we regret them later. We might be someone who had challenging circumstances. We were able to rise above it or find a pathway out. And that becomes a story we can share. So the beauty of life is that we get to live it, that we get to have experiences, that we get to have relationship, that we get to understand as we get older how valuable and important connection is. And while that's been broken in a lot of people because of the propaganda and the pandemic and all kinds of things that have happened, the reality is we are connected beings. We're interconnected, just like the microbes in our gut. We are the planet. We are cells in the planet of Earth's body. We are the cells of God's creation, if you want to think about it like that. But when we make ourselves healthy, right, that's the only thing we can do. We can't save mom. We can't help sister or brother. We can't, fix our best friend. This is who we're here to help. This is who, and not from a selfish perspective, but because when we raise our vibration, when we raise our individual frequency, we are literally helping the planet to heal. We are helping humanity to heal. We are helping everybody else in the system. It's like our fascia. I just learned that if like women who end up with a C-section scar later in life might have frozen shoulder. And the reason is because the fascia, which is supposed to be liquid but can be stiff, will yank on it to the point where it creates pain in another place in the body, completely unrelated. You never would have thought that unless you're aware of it. And so my point is just that when we take care of ourselves, when we elevate our vibration, when we do that, we are doing that for everybody. And that's how we get to world peace. I mean, I don't know that we'll ever Maybe we will. Look, I'm not going to rule it out. Maybe we get to a point where we lay down all the guns and we stop fighting. But the reality is, we do still need people to die. All I mean is that cells need to die. That's a normal part of life, right? What's cancer? Cancer is when cells agglomerate and they don't have apoptosis. They don't die and they create tumors. Of course, there's lots of theories about what cancer is. Is it parasites? Is it our body actually creating a tumor to sequester off cells that shouldn't be in our bodies any longer? Or is it something that comes from emotions, right? There's so much more we don't know. And that's what's so fun about being alive in the 21st century, in the age of Aquarius, is we get to start to innovate and have different ways of thinking about things, as opposed to, well, this is what they said, and this is what I'm told, and this is what I'm supposed to believe, right? We get to, and I don't mean just believe random willy-nilly things, but to explore what else could it be. You know, the near-death experiences, the quantum field, all of this is really coming forward now to help us understand that we're not two-dimensional or three-dimensional beings, but we exist in a much greater fabric of time and space. Okay, wow, this conversation went places I wasn't expecting it to, and that's because I love microbes. Microbes are magic. Bacteria is our powerhouse. They're our cornerstone. They're our foundation. They're literally the pearl in Pandora's jar, right? Remember the story of Pandora's jar? I know we call it a box. I like to call it a jar. It was literally a jar, but then box became the translated word. In any case, so Pandora, right? She comes, she has this box. She's not supposed to open it. It gets open and whoo, what flies out? All the bad things in the world, right? All the difficult cards we talked about earlier, famine and poverty and murder and, you know, all the sort of bad things we can think of. But what remains in the box? Hope. And that's what fermented foods, we cultivate them in a jar. We have hope in a jar. So when we make our own sauerkraut, when we make our own kombucha, when we make our own milk kefir, yogurt, or any of these beautiful ferments in jars, we're literally cultivating hope, and not just inside that jar, but inside of us. And we bring that hope out into the world. We bring that joy. We bring that vibration, that frequency of life, of vibrancy, of dynamism. And that's what we're here to do, right? That's what we're here to do on planet Earth, is to enjoy the beautiful heaven that we have been gifted. The flowers, the trees, the rainbows, the oceans, like everything on this planet. Oh my gosh. It's so worth living for. It's so beautiful. And that beauty is just right there for all of us to enjoy anytime we want. Anytime we want, we can shift our attention away from the fear, the pain, the sorrow, the suffering. We can look at the flowers. And yes, it doesn't mean that quote unquote bad things don't stop in the world. Of course they do. That's just part of life. And when we can accept that and also love and also allow our hearts to continue to grow and flourish and get big and vibrate at a higher frequency, I mean, that to me is what life is all about. So I hope you've enjoyed this fermentation journey. Of course, like, follow, share on all of your favorite platforms and channels. We're probably there, and if we're not, let us know and we'll join, because we know that this information is powerful. It's so simple. It's so inexpensive. It's so easy to do. And hey, go hug a friend. Go kiss your dog. Go exchange some microbes in this beautiful world that we live in, because that is how we grow together. Thank you, friends. Mwah!